I'm joined in studio today by Andrew Phelps, the Director of the Oregon Office of Emergency Management. Thanks so much for making the trip over from Salem.
Thanks for having us. Happy to be out here. It's a beautiful part of the state.
Now, you are in town for a statewide conference that's happening in Sun River, kicked off earlier this week. Tell me just a little bit about what the conference hopes to achieve.
That's right. We've got all of our local and tribal emergency management partners from around the state coming together for about a week. And there's integration with the private sector partners that we work with, utilities, and even our federal folks from FEMA Region 10 up near Seattle, and even FEMA headquarters out in D.C. They've come out to be part of the conversation about how we, as a state, can better prepare for the emergencies and kind of the bad days that we might be facing here in Oregon.
How long have you been with the department?
Wow, I've been here all of 6 weeks. I
Wow.
just started 6 weeks ago. Came out from New Mexico. I was the local emergency management director for the city of Santa Fe in New Mexico, and had the opportunity to come to Oregon, and it's been fantastic.
Well, Oregon is just better. So
you know, it's well, it's on the coast, which is fantastic. It's nice being by water, but then you have the diversity of climate. You have mountains, and you have big city and small towns, and it's been a great place to be.
A very diverse area. What got you into emergency management in the first place?
Wow, yeah, it was really my experiences on September 11th, 2001, during the terrorist attacks. I was living in New York at the time. My girlfriend, now wife, she was walking to work and saw the first explosion happen at the first tower, so she called me and let me know what she saw. So I went to the roof of our building, only about 20-25 blocks away from the World Trade Center in the East Village of Manhattan, and watched the second plane hit and both towers collapse. And more than anything, the horrible things that I saw, 2 days later I found myself on the World Trade Center site, on the pile of debris, moving buckets of debris and trying to help out. But more than the horrible images that will always stay with me was the overwhelming sense that I couldn't help. I couldn't be part of the solution. So after that experience, I'd been working in New York as an actor, doing theater and film and stuff like that. But after that experience, I really decided to kind of devote myself to studying emergency management and response. So next time something like that happened, I could be part of the solution, or better yet, try to find ways to prevent things like that from happening at all. So I went back to school and studied emergency management, public administration, became a firefighter, and did search and rescue and emergency medical services, and keep moving west. So I was in New Mexico for a while, and now I'm here in Oregon.
So from New York to Oregon, what part does our state play in that greater federal grand scheme?
Well, it plays a huge part. We say in emergency management that all disasters are local. Of course, local jurisdictions don't always have the resources, the training, the capabilities that they need to deal with every emergency that they might have. You can look at September 11th as a perfect example. There's no city that's more prepared for a catastrophic event than New York City, and they were completely overwhelmed. So you can look at a community like Bend and realize a big raging wildfire. The Bend Fire Department and the Deschutes County fire resources aren't necessarily going to be able to deal with that. So making sure that we can coordinate with state entities and federal resources to come to these communities and be part of the response and mitigate the damage caused by some of these disasters, whether it's a wildfire or flood or any other issue. That's really what my office tries to do, is serve as that coordinating body, not just for state and federal resources, but also to provide consistent preparedness messaging statewide.
Well, it hasn't been that long, actually, since just what you described did happen in
Sure.
Bend last year with the Two Bulls fire coming really right up to the edge of the city. I don't know if you're familiar with that incident, but
yeah.
What would be your assessment then on how Central Oregon does respond to the disasters that we do see?
Well, the unfortunate thing is we get to test that response way too often, I think, here in Oregon. The last couple of years, I know, has been very difficult from a wildland firefighting standpoint. In fact, a lot of my firefighting colleagues from New Mexico spent more time in Oregon last year than they did in New Mexico on fires. Fires are a natural part of the ecology when you live in a forested area like this. There's the component of wildfire that's necessary for healthy forests. We want to make sure that those fires, we can manage them, and we're doing proper forest management. But we're also preparing our citizens on things that they can do to reduce the impact of wildfires when they occur. Creating defensible space around homes, trying to build with less combustible materials. Instead of those beautiful cedar shingle roofs, you need to look at maybe composite materials or metal roofs.
But they're so pretty.
They're gorgeous and highly flammable. Oh, and that's sort of the thing. We've been in Sun River all week, and it's an absolute beautiful place, but a highly flammable place as well. So looking at things like simple things. Obviously, replacing your roof is a big project, and it's something that a lot of folks can't tackle. But clearing out some debris and brush, making sure that the limbs on trees are trimmed, so you reduce the ladder fuels that can take a small ground fire and put it up into the trees and spread much more rapidly and become more catastrophic.
Now, these are things, though, the suggestions that you're making are things that, like, the Deschutes County Fire Free program does work on, and it's things that Central Oregonians hear about on a fairly regular basis. So does the state get involved in some of those efforts, or is the county really on its own?
We do. We provide guidance and technical assistance. One of the big components of reducing the impact of disasters is mitigation planning. The Deschutes County Emergency Manager, Nathan Garibay, he just completed the Deschutes County hazard mitigation plan, and a component of that is looking at all hazards. So it's not just wildfire, but flooding, snowstorms, severe weather, things like that, things we can do to reduce the impact of these hazards. We can't eliminate all hazards. We just can't do it. We can prevent those hazards from becoming disasters, and that's really what a mitigation plan is focusing on. So while we're encouraging homeowners to do some small things to reduce the impact of a wildfire, at the county level and the state level, we take much bigger projects on to reduce fuel load, doing thinning projects so that we don't have overcrowded forests where wildfires can just spread super quick, and it makes it much harder to contain and wrap our arms around it from a firefighting standpoint. So projects like that, really, it's a whole community initiative. It's working with local residents to make sure that the projects we're doing are going to benefit those folks that need it most, integrating our private sector partners when we can, working with all the state partners, the Oregon Department of Forestry, State Fire Marshal's Office, environmental quality for air concerns during wildfires and smoke issues. It's really not something that falls to any one discipline or one department. It requires a lot of collaboration, and that's where my office excels.
Well, the events that you mentioned, the potential wildfires and flooding and winter storms that we get out here in Central Oregon, those events really only impact Central Oregonians, though, aside from the state resources and potential federal resources that we may require. It doesn't impact people in Salem or in Portland. It's really something we just have to kind of deal with locally. So why bring 250 people from across the state to Central Oregon? What part do we play for the state?
Well, it's aside from just being an absolutely stunning and gorgeous place.
Just a good excuse to come visit.
It's a great excuse to come out to visit and spend some money here in Deschutes County. It's a good central location for everyone. Emergency managers, we have a lot of emergency managers that are one-person shops. They're responsible for an entire county, and it's one person with a huge job and huge responsibility. We're working as hard as we can to educate local officials as to the role of emergency management. But sometimes that can be difficult, and the emergency managers just get things dumped on their plates at the local level that maybe aren't quite emergency management, but no one knows where they fit. So it can be difficult for our partners to travel, and expensive for them to travel always to Portland or to Salem. So having it at a more central location.
And as big as those metro areas are, they really are in a corner of the state. So if you're saying that you've got people coming from Medford, Jacksonville, those kind of areas that
absolutely
Lake County, even?
Literally all four corners of Oregon are represented. Astoria, Malheur County is here. Folks from Pendleton, just everybody from across the state kind of comes together for this conference to have some discussions and to learn from each other. The Oregon coast doesn't experience necessarily a whole lot of wildfires, but they can certainly learn lessons about interagency coordination and preparedness based on the experiences that Nathan and the folks here in Deschutes County had to deal with last year with evacuations. If you're evacuating a community, it doesn't matter so much why you're doing the evacuation, whether it's a wildfire or a hazmat incident or the potential tsunami, something along those lines. The process is still the same. You still need to make sure you're taking care of those folks, you're communicating with them, and you're providing them the resources they need to begin the recovery process. So the experiences that Nathan had here in Deschutes County last summer, those experiences are invaluable to be shared with our partners from around the state.
In just a couple of minutes that we've got left, we've heard a lot of talk, especially recently, about a Cascadia event and the role that Central Oregon would play in such an event. It's a term that emergency management preparedness people toss around. Explain to me what the Cascadia event is and what part our region plays in that, if it were to happen.
Yeah, so the Cascadia earthquake scenario, which we've been doing a ton of planning for, and we're working on a regional exercise with Washington and California for next spring, basically involves a catastrophic earthquake along the Cascadia subduction zone, which is off the Pacific coast, and it goes from Northern California up really to British Columbia. So an earthquake of a significant magnitude, 8.0, sort of like what we had in Japan back in 2011, would cause quite a bit of ground shaking, to be sure. But the other concern is the tsunami hazard that poses. I think we all remember images coming out of Japan of the tsunami just devastating the coastal community. And there's the very real possibility we could see that kind of devastation on the same scale here in Oregon. So working with folks in the Cascade region, Central Oregon, and even along the eastern side of Oregon, to build partnerships so that we can share resources, because we know a lot of the infrastructure is going to be out on the coast, but also prepare those communities for the influx of folks that are going to be leaving the tsunami inundation zone. A lot of them are maybe going to end up in the valley, but that's going to become pretty overwhelmed as well. So you're going to have folks coming as far east as Bend and Redmond. There's the airport in Redmond. That's planned as a staging point for federal resources until we know exactly where those resources can best be utilized to aid in rescue and recovery efforts.
So the point simply is that even though an event that happens on the coast or in Portland, that the whole state would need to be ready to just step up to the plate and get involved.
Absolutely, and it's a good readiness exercise, I think, for all of us. I once heard the difference between an emergency and a disaster. An emergency is when it happens next door, but it's a disaster when it happens to you. I think it's sort of the same thing when we're talking about a tsunami and earthquake along the coast. This is the kind of scenario where really we as Oregonians and every jurisdiction and state along the West Coast would need to come together to make sure that we can recover and take care of our neighbors, whether they're our next door neighbors or the neighbors that are 200 miles away out on the coast.
Okay. Andrew Phelps, the Director of the Oregon Office of Emergency Management, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
You're listening to FM News 100 and 1110 KBND.